Hi, these are Lance's Legends. Hit the subscribe button in the bottom right corner. I hope you enjoyed this story. I started taking scouts up to Lone Peak in 1973. I've taken dozens of troops and hundreds of boys up there, and they return as young men. I've never been good at all the advancement in the Boy Scouts of America, but I believed that boys could learn a lot if they were exposed to the rules of the earth, Mother Nature's obstacles, and learn to keep themselves safe and cared for. So I've always taken them on wilderness expeditions, and Lone Peak is where I always went, unless it was the West Deserts of Utah. In 2004, I took a group of 18 scouts up to Lone Peak. In late July, I had two other adults that went on the trip with me. Before I go on the trip, I always tell the boys, I'm not your mom. I'm not going to cook your food. I don't care if you eat it raw. I've given them suggestions for menus. I've given them required things to take on the trip and then some suggested things. But I've also told them that if they choose to take other things, as long as they can carry it, that's up to them. The catch to that, though, is if the person that's in the back, the adult that we designate as trailer, has to help the boy carry his equipment. When we get up there, the troop has the opportunity to pillage his pack for anything that's not on the list. Had quite a few soda pops carried for me, and then I've had to carry them the last mile or two and enjoyed a root beer or a Coke when we got to camp. But that's another story. The group that I took up that year was very prepared. They were all older young men. And it was a beautiful day. We got kind of a late start. And so we hit the trail a little after noon. There was a forecast that was a little troubling for thunderstorms, so I am a weather fanatic and I kept an eye on the weather. There were no ominous clouds on the south side of the mountain, but as we got up there, our view to the north was completely obscured by Lone Peak. And I began to feel an instability in the air. The wind began to gust from the west and the south and occasionally from the east, and you could just feel a storm brewing. And there are certain places we stop, pre-designated locations, first Hemengog and second Hemengog. Hemengog's a biblical word that means flat place, and second Hemengog is right at the top of Fort Canyon, where it tucks into Lone Peak. It's surrounded by hills and is about a 10-acre meadow that has a stream coming out the side of it. It's a beautiful place to camp. There's a freshwater spring there that you don't need to filter, and it's just a great place to camp. Beautiful big tall pines. And I could feel there was a really rowdy storm coming in, even though I couldn't see the clouds. So I told the boys I thought we should stop there, even though it was only about 8,200 feet, and we had planned to go up above 10,000 to a buttress where I usually camped in a saddle. But that night we decided to set up camp early. We got a fire going. I got the kids all setting up their tents and getting ready for the night, and then they began to cook dinner. And soon the wind just got blustery. It started to come in from all sides, from the north and the south and the east and the west, and pretty soon we began to hear the report of thunder around the point. And so I told the boys, look, nobody get under any tall trees. Nobody get on any predominant points like big tall boulders or hill points. Just stay down here in this saddle. If it starts to rain, get in your tent. And then I grabbed my poncho and I went up on the ridge and settled down a ways away from a few tall trees and a few tall boulders. Felt I was in a safe place, and I watched this rowdy storm come in. It was nature's beauty. There was lightning and powerful thunder, and the thunder got closer and closer to the lightning strikes, and soon there was no gap between the lightning and the thunder. It was lightning all around us. It was an intense display of Mother Nature's power. For about an hour, it rained like crazy. In fact, it was a record storm in several towns in Salt Lake and Utah County that day. I didn't realize back at home when the storm rolled in, the phone began to ring at our house. And my wife had to screen calls from parents, mothers and fathers who were alarmed and worried about their boys. And she assured them that if they were with me, I'd keep them safe. But the phone rang from the time that storm came until 2 in the morning. She told them all the same thing, that that's just the way it was. Meanwhile, I watched this storm until it began to dissipate, and then I hiked back to where the boys were huddled in their tents. Some of them were pretty scared. There was a little whimpering and whining going on about the conditions and the fact they could have died, and I assured them that we were good, and everybody had dinner, so I told them, if you brought any snacks, go ahead and enjoy them, but we need to go to bed. So I usually slept about 100 yards away from the boys up on a little knoll where I could keep an eye on things and stay away from the group. And in the middle of the night, probably 1 o'clock or so, we heard a helicopter approaching, and pretty soon, loud helicopter wash was right above us, just whoop, 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 whoop. And I woke up and looked, and pretty soon they had spotlights, and they were spotlighting each one of the tents, and just going from tent to tent and looking at things and going to the. So I put on my pants and got out of my bag and got up to where I was, and I was like, "What are you guys up to?" And they soon left and made their way up the mountain and landed near the summit of Lone Peak. We didn't think anything more of it. I went and talked to the boys for a minute, and we went back to bed. And next morning, we got up and had breakfast and broke camp and made our bid for the summit. And not long after we got on the trail, another helicopter flew by and looked to land up on top of the summit again. And it was a rather curious situation, but figured it was some kind of rescue. And we were nearing the summit when a couple of search and rescue men came past us and told us what had happened. When we got to the summit, there's a registry on top of Lone Peak, and we opened it up and began to read, and we read the last entry. It was by the search and rescue people that had recovered the bodies of 2 hikers. The log entry before them was a young couple, and they had sat on Lone Peak. The brother had gotten alarmed and hid under a rock because the lightning had gotten so intense. But this young couple sat on this predominant peak. As the name infers, Lone Peak. It sticks out between Salt Lake and Utah County very predominantly. And they sat there mesmerized by the beauty and power of this storm as it rolled across Salt Lake Valley, with dozens and dozens of lightning strikes, just one right after another. And the thunder must have gotten louder and louder and louder, and the lightning got closer and closer until they were killed. It was a sad situation, and the boys were a little disturbed by it. But we talked. After the hike, one of the scouts, Brigham, composed and recorded a song called Lightning on Lone Peak. So it was actually a good experience for those young men. They came back a lot wiser and realizing that rules have consequences. They're not all man-made. That's my story of Lightning on Lone Peak. I hope you enjoyed that story. These are Lance's Legends. Hit the subscribe button in the bottom right corner. Thanks for listening.